Suppose we have this standard form right here. This is a sign-up form. So you have first name, email, and a password field. And if I go ahead and I click join, of course, I should see errors. I should see a prompt to enter a valid name, email, and password. And as I type things in, I don't want to see the errors, of course, and so on. So I want to type in an email here, type in a password. Now, this video is not about creating a form. This is about testing a form. So this form right here, with all of its valid inputs, if I click join, I should see the form essentially being submitted. And I'll show you the code shortly. But in other words, if I were to take this email and empty it now, I should not be able to submit the form. If I click join, no submission happens. So again, let's talk about the code for this form, and then I want to jump right into the testing, which is what this video will be about. So jumping right into the form code, we see a few things right here. So a sign-up form, that's what we have, and it's a functional component. And we're using Formic. Now, you don't have to use Formic for your form, but Formic makes things a lot simpler. Form validation, state control, state management within your form is a lot simpler under Formic. But again, this video is not about creating a form. It is about testing a form. But in order for me to show you the tests, I want to show you the code first. So right here is my Formic form. I have my initial values of first name, password, and email. And we have some schema for the form. So we can see the schema up top right here. You see a first name is required. It is a string. A password is required. And an email is required. And it must be a valid email. And so on. Okay, so then I go here. And then on submit, when the user submits this form or tries to, it is a property of, it is a prop of this component right here called handle submit. So you would pass in a prop that handles the submission of this form upon submission. So before we jump into that, let's just go look at this here. So you see we have a field, it has a placeholder and so on, and it has an error message if it is invalid. Same deal for the rest of the fields. Lastly, we have this button right here. It is a submit button, and it is what submits the form. So that's that. Now, before we jump into a test, I'll just show you the thing that I talked about, which is the handler of submission. So the form is being used right here. This is an example, but inside this component, I have specified my form. I have specified the handle submit functional prop, which is right here. It's very simple. All it is upon submission, it simply console logs the values. That's why we saw over here, the values got console logged upon submission. So that's that. So basically, this is the form. Now let's jump right into tests. So if we go here to this form, once again, and I start typing things, ask yourself the question, what is it that I want to test? So as I'm typing things in, I want to ensure that if I don't type in a valid field in any of these fields, I should be seeing error messages. That's number one. I should see error messages. Number two is the form should not submit. So I want to test for seeing error messages upon invalid typings, and then it should not submit as well. Lastly, I should also be seeing the errors go away, no error messages upon valid typings. And lastly, I should see a form submission on a valid typing. These are the tests that I want to test for. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So we have a form signup.test.tsx file. So this is our test file. All right, so we're going to walk through this simply. The very first test is a standard test. We just want to see if it renders. Fair enough. Notice here, we have created props. We have specified the handle submit simply as a jest function right now. Again, we're not testing for the actual what happens upon submission. We are testing for whether the form is working as intended. Therefore, you don't need to actually simulate what's happening in the handle submit. You can simply pass in an empty function, and I will show you shortly why This is useful. Moving down, you see our first test is right here. So we should show error messages when the user enters an invalid text, let's say, anything invalid. So moving on, we see our props. We've created our component. Now within the act function, we are saying we are simulating an event. We're saying if the user clicks the component, which is the button right here, if the user clicks that button upon, let's say if they just come in right here and they click the button, I should be seeing 3 error messages in the document. Enter valid name, enter valid password, enter valid email. That's that. So if I go back here, I'm just going to refresh this page. If I just come in right away, I should see 3 error messages as I do. So this is what this test is checking for. Now, of course, because we have different combinations, for example, if I were to type in something valid here, I should see only 2 error messages. I'm not going to span through all those tests in just this one here. The point of this is to show you how to set up tests in forms. So if you want, you can do another test that will only test for 2 error messages and 1 no error message upon a valid entry of a name, for example. That's all up to you. Okay, let's move on though. So what else I should be seeing is on an invalid entry, I should see that the form is not submitted. And here's where this handle submit just function comes handy. So right now I've created a spy of that just function. Spy just means watch the function, spy on it. That's all that means. So just function, this is an empty function that's been created. I have set it to spy. I have then set handle submit to the spy. What's going on here? If I simulate the exact same event that I did last time, which is a click event, without typing in any valid entries, I should expect the spy not to be called. In other words, the form should not be submitted. Handle submit, this function should not be called. So if I go back here, right, I'm going to refresh the page again. I click join without entering anything valid. Notice here, there is no console log. That handle submit was not called. Okay, moving on. Then, finally, I should submit the form with no errors. So here's what happens. Going back here, all the same standard setup, all right? And we have this await function, of course, within an act. What's going on here? We first simulate the user typing Bob, let's say, on the first name field. User types bob@bob.com on the email field. Some password in the password field. Then clicks the button. At this point, I expect the form to submit. It is all valid entries right now. So I expect these errors to not be in the document, number one. In other words, I should not be seeing any errors. Lastly, I expect this spy to be called. The spy, once again, is the handle submit. I expect the form to be submitted, and that's that. So that's how that works. Now, once again, to show how these tests, let's go actually see these tests working, right? So, for example, if I were to go here and just type in npm run, I'll just type in test client. Don't want caps. All right, so test my client here. And I will specify the file that I want to test for. So test for a simple file name, and that would be sign up form. All right. Let's go ahead and run this. And we see all of our tests are passing. So that's good. Now, let's see how these tests fail if I don't handle this correctly. So let's go look at an example. If I were to take away, just take away, for example, one of these things right here. Let's say I take away the error message field in the first name. Take that away right there. In fact, I just take it away actually. So I don't like commenting in HTML type code. So, okay. So that has been taken away. Let's see how we respond. Okay. Now see that our test is failing because we are not seeing an error message upon invalid entry. So obviously our test is catching that. So our test, so you got to see your test fail as well to ensure that they are working correctly. So that's that. And just put this back in here. And we can do this for a lot of things, of course. So if I were to, first of all, if I were to not pass in a handle submit, this will give me a compilation error right away. So certain things are very useful. If you're using TypeScript, for example, it'll catch things on the fly before you run the code. So that's that. But for things that you can't necessarily catch on compile time, this is why you have tests. You want to test for functionality. That's that. So I hope all this makes sense, and hope you found this video useful. And that's that.